You thinking about getting out?
No. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know what I would do with myself if I did.
Ultimate fighting? Just a great idea off the top of my head. But seriously, you could do whatever you want to do. What makes you happy?
I don't know.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where each week we enter the world of a great film. We explore its themes, the history, the filmmaking, and the influence it has on us today. My name is Steve Morris, and I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. I'm a writer, producer, and host and voiceover artist here in San Diego, California. And here we go, Steve.
And John, did you know that it seems like for no particular plan on our part that we have actually not had a guest on the Cine-Files in like a year?
Yeah, it's been a while. We've been on a run with a number of these shows, and we've considered guests. We've looked at the possibility, but we've kind of defaulted back to doing our thing for a bit. But this was something that you kind of suggested, and I was like, that makes all the sense in the world. Let's do it.
Well, those of you following the Cine-Files know that we have decided to sort of make our way through the MCU on around or about the 10-year anniversary of films. And a few years ago, we did Captain America, the First Avenger, and we had a very special guest on that episode. And it only made sense, since today we are doing Captain America, the Winter Soldier, to welcome back actor, animation writer, Shannon McClung, and of course, Geek Buddies. Welcome back to the Cine-Files.
Oh, gentlemen, thank you so much. And to hear that I am the first guest in over a year, maybe a year, over a year. Yeah, I think I've earned it. That makes sense.
I think you have earned it. Definitely.
You did as well.
Which, of course, brings me to my first question, which is Shannon McClung. And I think maybe I know the answer to this. How did you first come to Captain America, the Winter Soldier?
Well, the great thing about listening to your all show and knowing your 10-year rule is that we are getting to an age where I can say for certain that I saw Captain America the Winter Soldier with you two, along with a large number of people. I believe there's actually even a photo floating around on someone's Instagram because Kalinowski brought his Captain America shield.
Right.
So I believe that was the first or second screening. But yeah, a big group of us went out to, I imagine was the ArcLight here in Hollywood. And the great thing about going to see a big special effects Marvel movie with this crew is when the movie is good, I mean, there is just an energy that you get not only from the other people in the theater, but your friends. Like there's a lot of eye contact in the theater. Like, can you believe what we just saw? And even with the Winter Soldier story, even though, those comic fans and even in some of the marketing, they gave away the big twist. It was still to hear the audible gasps in the theater. Again, from people who had read the comic that this was based on, it was still just so much fun.
John, do you remember heading off to see this movie?
Yeah, for sure. Because this was one I was looking forward to a lot because of the way they had hyped this one up as going back to the 1970s political thrillers. And certainly I was a massive fan of those, 3 Days of the Condor, The Parallax View. There were so many great, Day of the Jackal, Iger Sanction. There's so many great spy thrillers from the 1970s, and that they were bringing in Robert Redford to be a part of this. This was, to me, in a way, the MCU leveling up in a lot of ways, right? Not just the idea of taking on a political thriller rather than just making this a fun popcorn superhero movie, and then also bringing in someone like Robert Redford, who had this kind of pedigree in that field and in those genre of movies. So to me, there was a lot here that was going on, that was signifying to me that the MCU wanted to be taken seriously amongst film fans, not just people who enjoy superhero movies, but people who enjoy movies and cinema overall by going this route. And, spoiler alert, I think they absolutely knocked it out of the park with this film. And a lot of people still consider this one to be the greatest of the MCU movies, or in the top 5 of the greatest of the MCU movies. And I just remember us having like these extensive conversations afterwards about what was highlighted, what was pointed out, the commentary. And in doing research for the show today, there's a lot more behind the scenes that I think was going on as well because of the Russo's upbringing, which we'll get to a little bit later as we go on. But yeah, I absolutely remember watching with you guys and having these extensively long conversations for days afterwards, by the way. It wasn't just that night,
It's funny. I'm thinking of, like we came up with this sort of arbitrary 10-year rule, and the idea was that we wanted to talk about movies that have stood the test of time. And
Yeah.
here's one place where I think this has helped me in an interesting way, which is that, we've been going through Marvel movies. We've done 3 Iron Mans, we've done 2 Thors, we did the Avengers, there's a Hulk movie. And I think, I'm just going to throw this out there, I think this might be the first actually great film of the MCU.
Maybe. You might be right. Shannon, do you have any counterpoint to that?
I mean, I think on my personal list, in terms of solo hero adventures, this is absolutely number one. But I would maybe push back because Iron Man, mainly because of the performance of Robert Downey Jr., and it was the kickoff of the MCU. I would argue that Iron Man is a great movie, despite the fact that when you get to Act 3, it's like, what was Obadiah Stane's plan really going to be? I still would consider Iron Man a great movie, and Avengers for the time.
For the time, yes.
For the time. They pulled something off that I think we as comic fans thought was going to be impossible. But in terms of how things have aged, of those 3, I would say Winter Soldier is definitely the best.
Yeah, and it was right after Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World, which Iron Man 3, although initially people liked, there was the divisive nature of the
Mandarin.
The Mandarin, right. I was going to say Mandalorian. I'm like, I know that's not right. The Mandarin, right? And then Thor: The Dark World, which a lot of people didn't like, even though Shannon and I liked it when we went to go see it. So this was a little bit of a lull, maybe possibly with the MCU. Kind of people forget, like there were some stumbles in the first few phases. I know everyone's going crazy about the current phase, but it wasn't like it was all gravy and great films leading up through phase 4. There were some stumbles along the way, and you could argue that Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World could be in that stumbles category where you're like, well, can they really do this thing right after Avengers? As you said, Steve, Avengers was seen as this kind of, and Shannon, as this kind of like, a seminal film that that a lot of people were hoping would be pulled off so well, and it was, although in retrospect you could argue there are some holes in it. These 2 films that preceded Winter Soldier were ones that were making people question whether the MCU could keep that momentum going. And I think this was a great answer because Guardians of the Galaxy is right after this one.
Yeah.
So that's a hell of a 1-2 punch to let people know, like, that they were leveling up, as they said just a couple of minutes ago.
Well, and this is why I think, like, our 10-year rule actually really helped me to think about this because Shannon, I agree with you. I think Iron Man, the performance of Robert Downey Jr. is A+. Yeah. And then as you think about the film as a whole, the film is B+. Like and Avengers, which had such a wallop when we went to see it, because it's like they did it, they brought it all together. I know when we did our deep dive of it last year, that it was sort of like, okay,
Yeah.
It's good. It's totally good. It delivers on what it wants to deliver on. I think this 10 years later, it has only gotten better. It has aged like a fine wine, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would argue it's even more poignant now with that algorithm storyline, as we see how AI, as we see how Google and Amazon and all these retail people or retail companies rather, and all these systems use algorithms now to really burrow their ways into our lives and suggest things for us to get, or put people on watch lists, or hype up something to make people be a part of it more. Like, it's really massive how influential algorithms have become. And I think back in 2014, this was more a matter of like, well, I know what algorithms are, but like, I can still control it, or we can still control it. And I think now we see 10 years later, we are a slave to the algorithms in our lives, whether we want to admit it or not.
Well, and also, if you examine the way that Marvel makes movies now, that process hadn't really become what it is. Because when you look at the reshoots, and reshoots are for a lot of films, especially action films,
Yeah.
reshoots are built in to that schedule. Like there are going to be things that they need to rework. But I think when you're looking at the amount of practical action scenes with the car chases in this, that this movie, it probably did have reshoots, but I imagine that there were no large structural changes to the story that have been occurring the more that Marvel produces. Because when you're dealing with a big car chase, a big, physical set piece, going in and reshooting that's not an easy task. I mean, like as much as I like Thor Ragnarok, I mean, the moment where he and Loki are in Norway to go see Odin, like the green screen is very apparent. And apparently, originally they had shot that. It was supposed to take place in an alley. I don't know if that was a green screen shot originally, but that was the shot that they used in the trailer where you see Hela stop Mjolnir and then, destroy it. Reshooting a big practical effects movie is a lot more costly. So I think what we got with the Winter Soldier, with Captain America, the Winter Soldier, is kind of one of the purest forms of what they wanted to do, how it started and how it ended.
By the way, your prediction is totally right. There are some reshoots, but they're very, very few. And none of them are, as far as I know, are like structural, we need to fix a big plot hole that we messed up kind of reshoot. That's not what happened on this film.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's a little bit of pre-production. So they started the writing of Winter Soldier in 2011, right after the release of Captain America, the First Avenger. The writers, who I think don't get enough credit when you look at everything they did, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, they wrote First Avenger, they wrote Civil War, they wrote Thor Dark World, and they wrote both Infinity and Endgame. Now, it's Marvel movies, so how many other writers had their hands in these things, and figuring all that out is tough. But these guys, they're a big part of the establishment of the MCU.
Yeah, Steve, you're absolutely correct. I remember when we interviewed them at Collider a few years ago when I was there, and they were just so intelligent and gracious and smart about how they had laid all of this out. And I do think Marcus and McFeely, I've seen lately people have been clamoring for them to come back because they feel that some of the writing over the last few movies has not been at that level of Marcus and McFeely. And so it's great of you to point that out because the writing in here is stellar. It's just fantastic. The exchanges and the character beats, the really hard moments, the twists, the turns, all that stuff is written so well in this movie.
Yeah, there is, I think what they bring to the table, and obviously the performers get a lot of credit for this too, as well as the Russo brothers, is there is an authenticity to the performances in this film, especially this film, because they're, going into Civil War, going into the last two Avengers films. I mean, they are juggling a lot of balls. But when you look at this, how they have a smaller cast, they're able to focus in on those character moments and those relationships. Again, there's just a layer of authenticity. It doesn't ever seem like with this one that characters are doing a thing because they need the story to progress.
Yeah.
The characters are doing this thing because that's what the character would do. And these two writers at Comic-Con 2019, they actually, in the wake of Endgame, like they actually had a panel. And to have a screenwriter panel focused on one particular team, that's not a normal thing. Like you'll have directors panels where it could be multiple directors, you'll have cast show up, something to focus on a film, but this was literally the Marcus and McFeely panel, and they took the crowd in Hall H, which is, a big hall. They took the crowd through, this is how Endgame was constructed. And, they were obviously acknowledging the fact that they were not the only voices in the room, that there was Kevin Feige, there were the other producers, there were the Russo brothers, but the way that they whiteboarded what Endgame was going to, Infinity War and Endgame were going to be, I mean, it was really, really fantastic to watch.
The level of difficulty of pulling off Infinity War and Endgame, it's just off the charts high.
Yeah.
So one of the great things that you have when you have decades of IP is that you get to go and read a whole bunch of comic books to figure out, hey, what plot are we going to focus on in this story? And for this, it's a run on Captain America by Ed Brubaker. This is the Winter Soldier comics. I was out of comics, I think, by the time this came along, so I never read this. Did either of you read these comics when they were coming out?
I don't remember reading them, no. Shannon?
Not when it came out, but by chance, before you all asked me about this, just by chance, I actually, on Marvel Unlimited, went through and read the original Winter Soldier arc that Ed Brubaker wrote.
How was that, reading that after knowing the movie so well?
It's still, I mean, obviously it's much more elongated because the story runs for issues and issues and issues, and it was people in Cap's life being taken out.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of Bucky being resurrected was so not on the table that reading the old where they would send letters into the writers, letters to the editor, watching the fan base react to this, be like, it can't be Bucky. Bucky's gone. Like Bucky and Uncle Ben, those are the characters
Right.
that are dead and gone. And again, watching the reaction as it is revealed that the Winter Soldier is Bucky, how some people loved it and some people at the time absolutely hated it. It's like, you made that sacrifice. It's null and void now. Like, how terrible. And the fact that Bucky then went on to be redeemed, carried the shield for a little while, and has become one of the more compelling characters in the MCU, I think is it. Again, the timing of me reading this was just very fortunate. Kismet.
Now I'm just picturing the Uncle Ben, the Winter Soldier, with somehow zombie Uncle Ben coming back, talking about great power and great responsibility while destroying New York. I think this is a great idea.
Peter.
The summer power lifter.
And then as John said, and it sounds to me like a lot of this did come down from Kevin Feige, is that they were really inspired by these 70s espionage thrillers, including, as you mentioned, 3 Days of the Condor and Parallax View. And speaking of which, we are going to re-release our episode of 3 Days of the Condor, recorded with Steve Jones years ago, because that was a fantastic conversation. And I actually think for those of you who haven't seen that movie, listening to that podcast describing what it's about is going to give you, you're going to understand some of the connections with the Winter Soldier, because they're really, really there. So the Russos came in because Kevin Feige was a fan of their work on Community, loved their finale for the second season. And it seems like he just brought them. It seems like it was like a general meeting. Like I want to meet these guys. And that's what led to them being the directors of the Winter Soldier.
It's crazy. This is akin to Jordan Peele doing jumping from comedy to horror. Like, nobody saw that coming. And Get Out comes out and people are like, what in the hell? And then you see this every once in a while. Now, this isn't like actors like Robin Williams doing drama, right? That's stuff that you can, okay, cool. But like, the jump is so monumental from comedy to drama. And I know comedy is as difficult as drama. Don't get me wrong. But the idea of taking these guys, who, by the way, had only had one feature film, I think is Welcome to Collinwood, or one of these things that was their first feature film, if I'm correct. Yeah, Welcome to Collinwood had been their feature film in 2002. They did You, Me, and Dupree, and that's it. So these are middling comedies, middle of the road comedies, but had done, of course, as you said, Community, had done Arrested Development, they'd done a number of other shows. So for Kevin Feige, and I see nowadays people are like, well, they need to go back to the people who really built this thing, and it's like, they were newbies, just like the newbie filmmakers you see nowadays that you're upset about doing MCU movies. Some people have like selective amnesia about how this whole process went down, and how lucky the MCU was that this all worked out, and how lucky Feige was, and with skill as well. But like, how did he know that the Russo brothers were the right choice for this? And how did he know that they would deliver a political thriller MCU film on the level, well, I guess I don't want to say on the level of 3 Days of the Condor, but certainly one that evokes the best of that stuff from the 70s and really nailed the tone as correctly as they did. And I think you have to go back and rewatch Community to really see the undercurrent of drama within their comedy, with the interactions of the characters in the shows. And I get it, like, they didn't write the scripts, but certainly they were directing them in that way. And I think that's really powerful when you look at their work as directors. They understood how to mix the humor with the drama and still have the stakes being driven home as a subplot until it jumps right into the forefront by the end of the movie.
Well, and you look at the other people that were brought in to interview for the job, and one of them was F. Gary Gray. And F. Gary Gray is a fine director. I think his best movie thus far is still Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah.
But he did The Italian Job. He did The Negotiator with Samuel L. Jackson. So he's a perfectly fine director. But how different the MCU could possibly look if the Russo brothers weren't the ones at the helm, like if it was F. Gary Gray. I mean, they also brought in the director. I'm blanking on his name right now, but the guy who directed the Adjustment Bureau, because he had worked with Anthony Mackie before. So how different the MCU could look had they gone left instead of Russo.
Well, and the other thing too, I think it's not just the doing. Sorry, what, John? You have like
one of his puns again. Left instead of Russo. It's just terrible. Just terrible.
That just
Don't bring that shit here.
That just came to me.
This is a professional show.
Flew right by me. I was just focusing on what I was going to say next and didn't even hear what you were saying.
Your audience is now backing this up to roll their eyes.
and that is the value of having Shannon McClung back on the Cine-Files. What I was going to say is that I agree with both of your points, and it's not just going from comedy to drama. It's like if I was directing a small comedy movie or even a play, and I'm mostly working with actors and on character beats and on lines and stuff like that, and then I move to a small a drama or film or a play, I'm doing the same thing. They're going from sitcoms and small films to a huge action film with giant set pieces with massive moving parts. Like the idea, I mean, I have never directed anything like the car chase with Nick Fury. I mean, that's like a completely different world. It's remarkable that they jump in and do this all so well.
And when they were announced as being the directors, I remember there was sort of like a and there was, I don't know if Marvel came out and said it, but like, yeah, we're kind of scaling down this next Cat movie. That's, we're using these TV directors from Arrested Development. We're kind of scaling it down. We want this to be a 70s political thriller. And then when John and I were in Hall H in 2013, and we saw the extended trailer that they showed us with the helicarriers crashing down in Washington, and it was like, oh, they didn't scale down anything. Like this is bigger than the first movie.
Yeah, and I think the Russos are an interesting choice. And you say, Shannon, it was George Nolfi who was the director of Adjustment Bureau, which I kind of like, and I thought he could have been an interesting choice. But I think Feige chose the right, because F. Gary Gray is kind of hit or miss, and so I think they took a chance on these two guys, and it worked out. It could have absolutely crashed and burned like a helicarrier into Washington, D.C., and this would have been their third possible like negative reaction movie following Iron Man 3 and Dark World that could have really sank the MCU or at least put it on the ropes. And the fact that Winter Soldier put it back level, I think was great. And to speak of the Russo brothers, you have to look at their background a little bit. Their dad is Basil Russo, who was an American attorney, politician, and a judge in Cleveland and a member of the Democratic Party throughout his entire life. And so this influence, and they were involved in that stuff with their father. So they were involved in all. So this idea of 70s political thrillers, and Steve and Shannon, remember this, in the 70s, it was the Democrats who were seeing like government as the corrupt thing in our world, as the Nixon, all this stuff was come. So there was all this shit that was going on in the 70s that I think is fascinating to consider. And yes, we had Carter from 76 to 80, so it wasn't just all Republican presidents, but you could tell that they had an idea that the government, right? All these films were about the government. And so I think that influence is there. So you ask, like, why would you make these guys? Why would you choose these guys? Well, clearly, what they said in interviews, the Russo brothers, is that they came in with this political thriller point of view and angle. They had this probably bubbling under the surface for a long time. They just tended to go towards the comedic route. But clearly, they had this in their background for quite some time in the way they were raised and what have you. And so they had this just waiting for the opportunity. And my God, did they seize it and embrace it and push it forward. And I'm not saying this is a Democratic movie. I'm just saying the mentality at that time when they were being raised was that the government was trying to have, they had these organizations, these nefarious organizations of the past in the background. And nowadays, everyone feels that way, right? There's not everyone, but there's a lot of people on all political sides, on all political spectrums who feel like the government has these ulterior motives or these secret organizations or cabals. But in growing up in the 70s and 80s, it felt more that it was the governments that were currently in power who were doing that kind of stuff. And more often than not, you felt that it was the Republican side of things that was doing that, not necessarily the Democratic side of things, with the Kennedy assassination, Iran-Contra stuff. So there was a lot of that burgeoning through. So you think initially, well, why would they choose these guys who do comedies? And then you look at their background and go, well, they probably had a lot of this stuff and influence and conversations growing up that kind of shaped what they wanted to do with Winter Soldier.
One thing they said that I think is so important, and it's funny too, because we're now building to a Superman movie coming out where they
Yeah.
face a similar problem, which is, and what they said is that the key to Captain America is that the guy is so pure that you have to put him through trials that are even worse. That's the solution to dealing with a character that's just such a great person. You have to put them through more. And I was like, oh man, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense in terms of screenwriting.
You have to test their principles, their morality.
Exactly.
You have to test them. Yeah.
So speaking of which, shall we get into this film?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So we start with some quick titles, and then we're on the Washington Mall, and we see Anthony Mackie, Sam Wilson running, and then this guy speeds by saying,
On your left.
how do you guys feel about this opening?
Love it. Love the opening. Love that opening wide shot of the Washington Mall. And this is the only time in the film, I believe, that they use, maybe one of two times, that they use Alan Silvestri's theme from Captain America, the First Avenger. And I think switching themes, switching composers, tonally for the film was the right choice. But this and the moment where he goes to the Smithsonian, both of those times you get that Captain America First Avenger motif, and it is absolutely placed perfectly.
I think, first of all, as someone who grew up in DC, I love any films that are set in DC. It's a nice way to kind of go back home through the screen. And running on the mall is something I did for a while there in my 20s. And so that was fun. But I think what's smart about this opening is the introduction of Sam. They don't start with Scarlett. They don't start with Chris. They don't start with anybody of the established characters. They introduce Sam because Sam is going to be this kind of grounding energy in the movie. And he's the new character coming in. He's Falcon. Maybe they had a plan all the way back in 2014 that they were going to turn Sam into Captain America eventually. But this is, you introduce him as a guy who is running, just running. He's not, running hard. He's loping as he's running. He's doing his thing. And then you have this guy on the left. And it's really funny to watch it now in retrospect because of what he says to him, of course, in Endgame when they come out of the portals. It's so awesome, that moment, and to have it really established here, I think is great. And I also think this is Cap's sense of humor, right? You're getting a little bit, because he has a lot of wide berth every time he passes him, but he passes him real fucking close and says on your left. And I think this is Captain America's emotionally stunted way of trying to, communicate with people or maybe establish and have a new friend or something, because he's pretty lonely out there, as we see throughout the movie, how unmoored he is from his time. And so this idea of seeing maybe recognizes this guy as a military guy just by the way he carries himself, because we always know our own. And so this thing, maybe he sensed that from the way he was just carrying himself. And so he's messing with him in a way to kind of like establish some kind of rapport in an emotionally stunted way, in a dude way. And I think their back and forth when he's leaning against the tree kind of establishes that.
Well, I think, and I imagine you'll agree with this statement, Johnny. He's doing it in a soldier way.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Because
this is what two soldiers would do to each other. And
right,
look at where
consider it in a ball busting way.
Yeah. And you look at where Steve, like this movie takes place two years after the Avengers. And Steve, as we find out, doesn't have a lot of people in his life.
Yeah.
He's not hanging out with Thor. Thor is on Asgard. He and Tony probably don't have a ton to talk about. Bruce Banner is most likely in his lab someplace. He knows Natasha, but he's like, I don't know about you. I don't have anyone with shared experiences that I can talk to. Right. And so the moment establishing their dynamic right at the top of the film, I thought was absolutely the right choice.
So first of all, this might be my favorite meeting sort of instant friendship in the MCU. It's so perfectly done. I agree with everything both of you have said. And I think on some level, Steve picks Sam.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%.
It's not just that he saw him. He saw a lot of veterans that he didn't do this. It's somehow he's picked Sam. And it's interesting too, is like, how do you show a lack, like insecurity, with someone who isn't insecure? Like Steve needs he needs a human, he needs a friend.
Yeah.
And yet his way of expressing that is totally, as you said, ball busting. And, because it's like the distance between the speed that Steve Rogers can run I mean, my guess is Sam is running really fast. I bet he's got great times. This guy's in incredible shape. And then he goes by again, another on your left. Then I love Sam kind of sprints after him, like for a second, like he's going to catch him. And then it's later on, and he's just totally exhausted. And we should talk about Anthony Mackie, because my understanding is it was a lifelong dream of his to play a Marvel character. And he was sending in emails when the MCU just started to like go, hey, I could play anything. And it was Feige's idea to have him play Falcon. There's one of the other people who read for that character is Michael B. Jordan. And imagine the entirely different world we would have if he was cast as Falcon.
Wow. But it would be a completely different relationship, right? Because Michael B's energy is not Anthony's energy. Now, can Anthony do Michael B's energy? Sure. As we saw in 8 Mile, he can play a little harder edge to him. But like, yeah, that's a different Falcon. That's a Falcon you want to take the mantle immediately. Whereas with Mackie, for all the stuff you hear about off-screen stuff with Anthony's got that energy that's very warm when on screen. You like this guy. You want to know this guy, right? And I think there is a real, and I think as you said, Steve, I think it's important to note the sending of the emails. That shows you that he was a guy who was eager to be part of this world. And so you sense that in the film that he is eager, but not over eager. He's solid and he cares. And so all of that comes through in the energy in the opening back and forth with them is real sweet too. Is yeah, I figured you were, Steve Rogers. And so he knew what was happening. Yeah. And he's very cool about it. Like he's chill about it. And he even has a nice back and forth suggesting something for him to listen to. So I kind of I think you make a great point, Steve. It was a good beginning interaction between these two guys that you immediately like him,
And Chris Evans and Anthony Mackie feel like contemporaries, despite the fact that Steve Rogers is in his 90s. Like these guys feel like they're on the same level. I think Michael B. Jordan, because of that age difference, because he is a little younger, I think he may have come off a little more like he does have that kind of darker energy, but I think he would have come off potentially a little more sidekicky. And that's not what Sam is. Sam isn't a sidekick. Sam's a partner.
Good point, because that's 10 years ago. So maybe it's a different energy 10 years ago than Michael B. Jordan now, right? So that's a great point, Shannon.
Well, the thing that Russo said about Anthony Mackie is they said he never had an untruthful moment in front of the camera. Oh, you always believe him. And that he had an incredible ability to combine charm and integrity. And I think it's his integrity that is so key in this scene.
Dude, you just ran like 13 miles in 30 minutes.
Guess I got a late start.
Really?
And I love the response because and you guys both know this, is there's certain times like, oh, we're giving each other shit. That's what we are inhabiting the roles of men in a manly conversation. And he goes,
you should be ashamed of yourself. You should take another lap. Did you just take it? I assume you just took it.
The thing that occurred to me about it is that this is also about fame. It's not like everyone doesn't know that Steve Rogers running 100 miles an hour on the mall. I mean, like everybody knows this is Captain America. And it's Steve Rogers' way of dealing with his fame is sort of stepping through it in this, like making a point of it with the on your left thing. And this is how how Sam responds to it. I'm not going to deal with your fame at all. I'm just going to give you crap.
Yeah, I'm gonna see you as one of the boys, which is probably what Steve has been desperate to feel for quite some time, even going all the way back to when he became Captain America, right? Because you got to remember his genesis, which is a guy who just wanted to fight for his country and defend his country and be accepted by the boys in the military who he looked up to. He just accelerated with that program to being above them, which always made him uncomfortable. And so it makes sense that he'd look for someone who, and you're probably right, Steve, I think he did case Sam out for a bit. And then, kind of in his own, as I said, emotionally stunted way, initiated a conversation in this way as a military guy and as a dude to try to have some kind of connection with somebody.
And we confirm that he's another veteran. And this is the thing too, he's not just a veteran. He's a veteran who works with vets at the VA.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that Steve knows that at this point, because that would be much more stalker-ish if he actually knew that piece of information. But I bet there are a lot of veterans who kind of sat in the back at the meeting and didn't say anything and then went over to get a cup of coffee next to Sam and just shooting the shit. And Sam knew they had something they needed to talk about. Yeah. And then he gave them the opening, which is exactly what happens here. Because after the little bit of small talk, he says,
must have freaked you out coming home after the whole defrosting thing.
Because Steve does need to talk to someone about what's going on in his life.
That's an excellent point. That Sam can sense it.
Yeah.
That Steve is initiating this conversation and these actions because he wants to talk about something. And so Sam makes this effort and opens the doors, and then even brings up, it must have been tough coming back, sleeping in the bed, those things, those little things like that, the back and forth that they have that military guys would understand, especially guys who've served overseas in wars, as both of them have in different times. You get that sense of kinship. And as you said, Steve, looking for somebody with life experience, which he says later on to Natasha in the car when she's trying to suggest all these people for him to date. He's like, it's just tough to find anybody with shared life experience.
Yeah.
So he would naturally default to these guys who've been at wars and have served and understand that experience.
Well, and there's this moment where, and I think it's really important, is that he says, yeah, it takes some getting used to. And then Steve starts to go.
Yeah. Yes.
And Sam says,
It's your bed, right?
which is, he sees, no, this guy's, he's not done. He needs to talk. And it's, I think the ability to see right into this issue this is what solidifies the friendship.
You must miss the good old days, huh?
Wow. Things aren't so bad. Food's a lot better. We used to boil everything. No polio's good. Internet, so helpful. Been reading that a lot, trying to catch up.
That's one line where you get several years of Steve Rogers' life and what he's been trying to do.
Yeah.
And I love this because then Sam adds his suggestion.
Marvin Gaye, 1972 Trouble Man soundtrack. Everything you missed, jammed into one album.
I'll put it on the list.
John, how do you feel about the picking of that particular album?
I think it's a smart choice because Trouble Man is known to certain people who grew up at a certain time, and that album is known as like this changing of Marvin Gaye from the 1950s, 60s guy who was, sing Ain't No Mountain High Enough and all of that. That was great. His early stuff is fantastic. His duets are incredible. But this is where he becomes socially conscious about the world, about global issues, about what's going on in the Black community, about what's going on in the 70s towards people of color. Like, this is a album that signifies the change of Marvin Gaye. And so it's good because it's also a connection back to those section of films from the 1970s. But also it's just smart because it shows that this is a film that is going to be dealing with these political and social issues. And so having him suggested as a Black man to Captain America, I think is a really smart thing. And it's fun Easter egg that depending on what country version you watch of this film, everything when they showcase what's written in the notebook is region specific, which I think is great. Like the American stuff you see with the standard American version. But if you watch the England version, it's like the World Cup in 1966 and this other stuff and this English thing. And if you watch in Korea, they mentioned the original Old Boy and this South Korean football player. So it's just different depending on the region. But the thing that stays the same is Trouble Man in each of them, which I think is awesome,
Well, and in Australia, because I remember hearing this, and so I looked it up. In the Australian version, they list AC/DC, space travel, and Steve Irwin. Which I was like, that's fantastic. In Russia, they talk about Yuri Gagarin.
Oh yeah.
There's a bunch of World Cup stuff, especially in the European countries. Like I think France had their World Cup win, which was in the late 90s. I thought that was a really smart move to kind of, despite the fact that this is it is called Captain America. But they reaching out to the international audiences of like Steve Rogers wants to know about what happened everywhere.
And then right in the middle of this lovely kind of conversation where you feel a real connection to this guy, Cap gets a buzz on his phone and we see mission alert, extraction imminent, meet at the curb.
All right, Sam. Duty calls. Thanks for the run, if that's what you want to call running.
Oh, that's how it is?
Oh, that's how it is.
Okay.
I just, these guys are now best friends. Which is interesting because this is a movie about his other best friend,
Right.
That's coming back.
Well, and Sam has one line. I want to get your all's thoughts on this. I know we are spending a lot of time on the very first scene of the movie, but Sam says to Steve,
Anytime you want to stop by the VA, make me look awesome in front of the girl at the front desk, just let me know.
Do you think there's a girl?
No.
Or do you think Sam just wants to get Steve to the VA?
Nope. Always felt that was him trying to get Steve to the VA.
Same.
100%.
Yeah. And a black Corvette pulls up, and there is Natasha.
Hey, fellas. Either one of you know where the Smithsonian is? I'm here to pick up a fossil.
And the reaction from Steve Rogers, the fact that they choose not to show his face, just him walking into frame saying, that's hilarious. That's hilarious.
Well, and I love the Sam kind of bending down to look into the car shot because it's just like, oh, I see. I like that world. That's an interesting world you're living in there, you know?
It's also Sam, Mac, and Natasha.
Exactly,
How you doing? You know, and so, and people forget, like, the initial stuff with Natasha, well, I guess maybe not everybody forgets because it's been brought up, but like, you know, she was, there's a sexuality to Natasha that the MCU initially played up in these first few movies with her, and they went away from it later on, but there was this sexuality to her. And so, you know, there's interactions later with her and Steve in the film, but this moment here with Anthony just shows you, like, you know, this is a woman who's very in control of her sexuality, and it radiates and it attracts men of power, you know, to make moves or have connections with her. And it's something she's used before, as we find out in Black Widow, right? She uses it to disarm people and to get into certain situations so that she can take people out.
I think one thing this movie does so well, and we'll get into it later, is that they really get Natasha better than any movie, I think, including Black Widow, and that the idea of, like, she presents uber confident in every single way. Yeah. But what this movie shows is the vulnerability that's beneath all that confidence that she puts out, you know? Mm-hmm. By the way, and this goes to your point, Shannon, is that this was one of Kevin Feige's big thing was all the other people in the Avengers, they have their groups to go back to. Cap doesn't have anybody except for, you know, Nick Fury and Natasha, and those aren't friendships exactly. By the end of this movie, maybe they will be, but at this point, they're not.
Target is a mobile satellite launch platform, the Lemurian Star. They were sending up their last payload when pirates took them 93 minutes ago.
Any demands?
$1.5 billion.
Why so steep?
Because it's shields.
We're on a jet, it's night, and we get to meet Brock Rumlow, which is Frank Grillo. This character will become Crossbones. And initially, when they started making this was just a henchman. And then the idea came in later about, well, why don't we make him Crossbones and then we can do more with it? Which to me is like, it's like the opposite of how Marvel does things today. Yeah. Is that then it was, oh, we can plus this character by giving them a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Whereas now it's, how do we shoehorn this character into this movie? Because we have to introduce 17 different things in this film, you know?
Great point. Yeah.
And other actors that were allegedly up for Brock Rumlow, Nicholas Coster-Waldau from Game of Thrones.
Ooh. Wow.
Josh Holloway from Lost, who would have been an interesting Crossbones, and Kevin Durand, who played the Blob in X-Men Origins Wolverine and is in theaters right now with Abigail.
Yeah.
Okay. I love Captain America's spy black uniform.
Yes.
It is so cool looking.
It's my favorite one. The blue and white. It's my fucking favorite one, man.
How many pirates?
25. Top mercs led by this guy, George Batroc.
And we see his face, and it's George St. Pierre from the MMA. Yeah. And what we hear is that SHIELD agent Jasper Sitwell is actually one of the hostages, and that just sort of, I'd say, brings up a tiny little red flag of like, wait, why is he there? What's going on?
Yeah. Was it the first time that we saw him crossing over into the movies, right? Because he's from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Isn't that right, Shannon? Or am I off?
No, he started in Thor. He was one of the agents with Coulson. Okay. And he pops up very quickly in the Avengers. Gotcha. I think he's the guy on the helicarrier that actually finds out where Loki is when he's in Germany.
Gotcha. But he's not in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
He's in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. happened after the Avengers.
Gotcha. Okay.
And Cap gives his orders, and Chris Evans has such an ability to tap into that natural leader skill.
All right, I'm going to sweep the deck and find Batroc. Nat, you kill the engines and wait for instructions. Rumlow, you sweep aft, find the hostages, get them to the life pods, get them out.
I love Captain America as the leader.
Yeah, I mean, and I love Chris Evans as Captain America. I mean, everything prior to him playing Steve Rogers, he played a lot of wise asses. I mean, he was Johnny Storm. He was very much your standard wise ass. And so watching him in this role, getting to see the leadership, the maturity that comes along when you are the person, making the calls. I mean, Chris Evans, it fit Chris Evans like a glove.
Yeah, and I do want to say on the costume, Steve, that you correctly pointed out, this is from the Secret Avengers storyline, and the reason they made the change is because the Russo brothers and Feige and them was because the costume from the first movie, which Shannon and I love, I'm sure you enjoy the films too as well, Steve. People felt it was a bit too old-fashioned, and they wanted this new outfit to kind of reflect the darker areas that Captain America was going to go into in this movie. So they didn't want him to necessarily wear the red, white, and blue. They wanted it to be something more muted, something darker. And so you get that kind of subconscious feeling that this is a Captain America that's a little grayer than we were used to seeing, and he's going to be dealing with some hard stuff that's going to test his morals and his principles.
And now we get into the first of many little fun bits of dialogue with Natasha and Cap.
You do anything fun Saturday night?
Well, all the guys from my barbershop quartet are dead, so no, not really.
So first of all, that's hilarious and awesome.
Yeah.
And then we get to this thing, which is her, Natasha, pressuring him to ask someone out.
You know, if you ask Kristen out from statistics, she'd probably say yes.
That's why I don't ask.
Too shy or too scared?
Too busy.
And he jumps off the plane. What I'm trying to think of how to ask the question. So is Cap interested in asking people out? Like, is that part of what he's missing, or is he actually too busy? Is this the truth that he's too busy?
I think two things can be true at the same time. I think he is absolutely busy, but at the same time, he's still internally that little 90-pound guy from the first movie. And I think there's a degree of shyness. Like he's not an open book. I mean, you know, we're going to see in later scenes when he does try to broach conversation with a woman, not with Sam, because that's another soldier. Yeah. When he tries to broach conversation with a woman, he's clumsy. Despite the fact that he might be one of the most famous people on the planet because of what he has done and gone through, he's still that shy 90-pound weakling.
Yeah. You know, they say that about people who, you know, as someone who struggled with their weight my whole life, they say that about people who lose a lot of weight. They still stay kind of like that fat little person inside, and they have to kind of go and go to therapy and process that as they transition into a different life to hold on to that. And, you know, you see that in a number of areas when you make this change. And remember, his change is so sudden, so overnight, everyone attention. And so, yeah, as you said, Shannon, still the weakling, but also, you know, Natasha unsettles him. You know, Natasha is a very strong, aggressive, you know, very what you would seem to be confident woman on the outside. And as you said, he's still the 90-pound weakling. So that unsettles him a little bit. The thing with Peggy is Peggy was a little bit softer in certain moments, a little more vulnerable. Then she's hard as shit. When she tries to shoot him with that shield, I think it's hilarious. But like there's a connection there. And I think he's still processing the loss of Peggy. And as we see later, she is still alive, but they didn't have that dance. They didn't have that life. So the idea of moving on, again, this is a Cap who is in transition throughout this whole movie. He is in a place where he, as you said, Steve, he has no one to go back to. He has no friends, no home, no girl. And so he's just figuring it out. He's just survived the Avengers situation and all of that happened there. And so like, how is he figuring out? And now he's going to find the place that is his home that he thought was his second home in S.H.I.E.L.D. has been corrupted from the inside out by the old enemy who was trying to destroy his home country in the 1940s. So there's a lot here that he is processing. And so the idea of, you know, dating somebody is something that I don't think he'd be conducive to do, even if he was in the best of places right now mentally.
So I have multiple things to say. The first thing is, having been more than once a fat person who became a skinnier person.
Oh yeah.
I can tell you 100% that I owe it, whether I was, you know, 290 pounds or 198 pounds, I still felt like a fat person walking around. Like that doesn't leave you those things. Yeah. The second thing is, we talk about Cap being 95 years old, but I go like, okay, I'm not sure exactly what year he got the super soldier serum, but it was the middle of the war, not the beginning of the war. Right. You know, and then he gets frozen a couple of years later, maybe, and then he gets thawed out, and then we have shortly before the Avengers, I think, and that's 2 years ago. So is it 5 years of his life since he got the super soldier serum? Yeah, maybe 4.
Yeah.
You know, he's not 95. He actually is, 30 something.
Yeah.
This hasn't been a long time. And I do connect he went to talk to Sam and then he is literally walking away if Sam doesn't say the bed's too soft.
Right.
So his ability to actually make these connections, he's really good at being the leader. He knows how to be, you know what it is? He knows how to be Captain America. He doesn't actually know how to be Steve Rogers.
That's a great point. That's a very astute point.
And of course, the button on this is when he jumps off the plane. Someone says,
"Is he wearing a parachute?"
No.
And then we go into a fantastic action sequence, I think, top to bottom.
Yes.
Attacking the ship.
This is peak Captain America here. This is someone who has the super soldier serum, and this is 2 years after the Avengers. So he has 2 years of training that he didn't have in the Second World War. And you watch how he is able, he's a soldier, so he can kill, but he's not trying to kill anybody. He's trying to knock him out or he's trying to knock him overboard. It's only when we see the one terrorist reaching for the alarm that we see him throw that knife, sticking the guy's hand in the wall.
Yeah. And this, by the way, was shot on the Sea Launch Commander, which was docked in Long Beach. So they're on a real ship. And they're just, if I were to point out all the little things that make this sequence cool, we would be here forever, which we might be anyway, frankly. But like, stuff like him where you see in the background that he's climbing up the chain that goes down to the anchor, the way that he takes out 3 guys in quick succession and the acrobatics, the use of the shield. I love the shot of him running right to left along the deck, just like a bull, taking people out. They're just so fantastic. As you mentioned, throwing the knife and catching the guy's hand about to pull the alarm. And then someone has him dead to rights in his sights, and the team descends and saves him.
Thanks. Yeah, you seem pretty helpless without me.
Yeah, they give Grillo an undercurrent here that is smart. Like he's got those moments that there's a jealousy here of Captain America, right? That you can see that Grillo, I think, does a really nice job. Just kind of playing. It's just there just bubbling there under the surface of some of his exchanges. When he's telling the dude like he doesn't use a parachute, and he never does. There's that smile of like fuck him. And then down when they land, there's I'm sure you were fine. You were in trouble, or you missed us, or whatever he says without me. But like he's just these little shots. They're not like overt shots. They're passive aggressive. But you can see them as these kind of, I'm going to say this, but I'm going to present it in a way that's consumable, and he won't suspect how much I don't like him. But you can sense it's building to this elevator fight. And then later, of course, at the end of the movie, when they have the battle on the carrier.
That's a great point, and this is what I think at this moment of the MCU, they do so well, which is to track all these characters. And I think you're totally right. They absolutely introduce that bit of because without the super soldier serum, Brock kicks his ass. I mean, there's not, any comparison.
And Frank's a damn good actor when he gets a chance to do good material. And so to see him play this out, I like him in the movie. I wish there had been more with him. And I know he has said that in interviews in the past, that there were bigger plans for Crossbones, but they never got around to it.
And then we have the next little moment building on what we saw before, which is Natasha just continues her conversation as if there's been no action sequence in the middle.
What about the nurse that lives across the hall from you? She seems kind of nice.
Secure the engine room, then find me a date.
I'm multitasking.
Now, does Natasha know that this is an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
She 100% knows.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, and this is the thing, too. I think Natasha's going to go through a big change in the course of this movie of who she is at the beginning and who she is at the end. Yeah. We have a little bit of time with the hostages where we see they're threatening them and they're speaking in French, and Stillwell's there. Damn it. And they're speaking in French and Sitwell's there. This is where dyslexia doesn't help me.
Stillwell, Angel. You're just thinking League of Their Own.
Oh my God, I forgot that's where the name came from.
Hey, Sarah.
Then that quick wire around him tosses him off the thing, and then she uses him to descend. Like it basically turns this other guy as a counterweight to her descending. And I believe that's really Scarlett Johansson doing a 40-foot drop, firing her weapons on a descender.
Nice. And she's killing here, right? I mean, we're clear, right? She's killing here.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I think so, yeah.
Prejudice.
It's great. As we're setting up to rescue the hostages, the shot of we got a bunch of kind of black ops guy go towards the railing of the ship, go over the side on ropes, and then the camera tilts with them as they walk down the side of the ship. Super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you forget because our focus is on Captain America, the super soldier. You forget that the people that he is commanding are they are the best of the best. I mean, you get a great moment when Rumlow shocks a guy, and you see the deft touch that he does after he shocks him. The guy goes limp. He's able to grab him and slowly place him down. The people that Cap is in command of, they are badasses.
Mm-hmm.
Status, Natasha. Hang on!
And we watch her again with those ridiculous Black Widow spinning, throwing, flipping. There's one where she's like on the guy and like kips out with her leg in order to motivate the flip. I mean, it's just all so cool.
Yeah.
And then everyone is wiped out.
I told you, S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't negotiate.
Up on the bridge, again, it's all the attention to detail. There's Batroc is sitting on the bridge, and then we see Cap way in the background, really, really small in the window, and then that shield comes through, almost taking Batroc's head off. It's all just really, really cool.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we get what we've wanted to see, which is a fight between multi-time UFC champion coming after Steve Rogers, and he hits him with just that first kick, knocks him down. There was 4 months of training to pull off this fight scene, and it is a great hand-to-hand fight scene.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know many UFC guys who are this limber to do the kind of flips and stuff that he's doing at his size, and he pulls it off no problem. Do you know what I'm saying? The gymnastics moves of here are fantastic from him, and I'm sure there's a stunt double with some of the other
So for the serious acrobatics, it's not him, but most of this is him.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how limber and flexible he is for some of these shots in close hand-to-hand combat with Chris. And I think it's great that he calls him out and says, "I thought you were more than just a shield." He's like, "All right, bitch, let's go." Takes the helmet off.
Well, and he answers him in French.
Yeah,
because having served in World War II, he would have learned a little bit of French.
And I always go to like, man, Batroc to go toe-to-toe with a guy with super soldier serum is a way better fighter than Steve Rogers actually is. But the fight scene is still totally satisfying.
Right. And for those of you who are not comic book fans, Batroc is an actual comic book character, Batroc the Leaper. And they kept the like orange and purple combo in the dress. So it was nice to kind of introduce this guy. Because it's not the last time we see this guy in the film as well.
Well, and from the comics, Batroc the Leaper is ridiculous. Like, he has a giant mustache. I mean, he's in circus tights. I mean, the way that they were able to level up this character was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And Cap takes him out by knocking him through this door.
Oh, this is awkward.
And there is Natasha out of focus, obviously pulling data off a computer, which was not part of their mission.
Yeah. Well, Cap's mission.
Right. It was not part of Cap's mission.
Our mission is to rescue hostages.
No, that's your mission. And you've done it beautifully.
You just jeopardized this whole operation.
I think that's overstating things.
Just as Batroc tosses a grenade and Cap saves Black Widow's life.
Okay, that one's on me.
You're damn right.
Well, and you can kind of tell that Natasha, even though she knows that Steve doesn't trust her, you can tell that Natasha does have a bit of respect for Steve.
Yeah.
Because someone in her with that spycraft training, she could have told Steve anything about this computer. And more than likely, she's going to be talking over his head and he might believe it. But she's honest with him. It's like, look, this is what we have to do.
And this is part of her journey, too, because she has the belief system that, yes, I'm doing underhanded things, but I'm doing underhanded things for someone I can 100% trust, which is Nick Fury and the organization of S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah. She just has decided that they're all good guys. And this is part of the journey she has to go through, you know?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Again, there's multiple thread lines of commentary throughout this film. And this idea of, okay, I will do nefarious shit because I believe in the cause or I believe in these people. That more often than not leads to a real reckoning for yourself when you come to terms with what was actually going on. And as you said, Natasha is on her own journey as well in the movie, and she does as the film progresses, come to terms with this thing, especially after the scene with Zola that I don't know if we're going to get to in this part, but like that scene really kind of hammers it home for both of them, by the way, which I think is great.
By the way, initially, this was supposed to be Black Widow and Hawkeye, and they were going back and forth to different stuff. And of course, it makes perfect sense that Hawkeye would be working for S.H.I.E.L.D. and doing this. He would fit perfectly into these kinds of action sequences. And what they decided, which again, I think is brilliant and the opposite of what the MCU is doing today, is they said, you know what, if we have both of them, it weakens both of them. Better to really spend more time on one character than not enough time on two.
Yeah, plus you don't spend enough time hinting at the connection between him and Natasha, the growing connection, not just friendship, occasional flirts, occasional attraction, but certainly friendship. And with Clint there, that kind of muddies it because she already has a hinted at relationship with Clint. And I think that would have just been, I agree. It would have been just too muddy.
Well, with Clint, she has someone to confide in.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Actually, that's a huge change in the dynamic. I hadn't thought about that. But then if Clint's there, he's her number one person to talk to. She wouldn't have all this experience with Cap. Yeah.
She wouldn't be asking him about like who you dating, or they'd be both tag teaming him and joking about who you should date rather than it coming off as something that is like her trying to help him. It would have come off as two people like giving him a little shit, which would have had a whole other element to it than something earnest, which I think Natasha is kind of being earnest.
We're back at S.H.I.E.L.D. headquarters, and Steve confronts Nick.
You just can't stop yourself from lying, can you?
I didn't lie. Agent Romanoff had a different mission than yours.
Which you didn't feel obliged to share.
I'm not obliged to do anything.
Those hostages could have died, Nick.
I sent the greatest soldier in history to make sure that didn't happen.
And I love this line from Cap.
Soldiers trust each other. That's what makes it an army. Not a bunch of guys running around shooting guns.
Last time I trusted someone, I lost an eye.
Throwaway lines are important in good films because they're never throwaway lines. In that scene earlier, before they jump on the Lemurian star, and by the way, the Lemurian is a connection to the Celestial, so a little Easter egg there, but like the conversation they're having about the boat, Steve says, I'm getting a little tired of being Nick's mop-up boy or whatever. So you can tell there's building. So that line, which could feel like a throwaway line, is actually hinting at the undercurrent of resentment that has been building for Steve ever since Fury unfroze him, or they discovered him and they unfroze him, and essentially has used him on these missions. So Steve's finally coming to this point where like, no, I'm going to start questioning authority. And this is the all-American soldier who was all about following the rules and all of that. Now he's the one questioning Nick. So him confronting him so aggressively and so in his face about this whole situation. And Nick at times has used people, as we see through the MCU. He has used people thinking that he knows what's best for the greater good, and he's not always right. And so Cap calling him out, I think, is also a nice little undercurrent of tension between these guys that, of course, gets resolved in a positive way by the end of the movie. But like, I like that this is here. The principled guy versus the guy who lives in a future fear and is trying to create a situation where they can control the world and save people and thinking he's doing the right thing. We see that in Age of Ultron, which I think two or three movies later, with Tony Stark wanting to do the same thing, and that ends up creating Ultron and Vision as well. But still, the impulse there is this fear, and that we must control and watch everything so that we don't get caught with our pants down. But as we find out from that algorithm later, that's a dangerous road to walk, and hardly anyone can control where it's going to lead to, and it rarely leads to a positive.
And Fury's justification, which is kind of bullshit. He's like,
I didn't want you doing anything you weren't comfortable with. Agent Romanoff is comfortable with everything.
In his head, he has justified. He's like, I actually did you a favor here.
Right.
Like, but it's 100% Nick Fury. Like, that is the way he thinks. He compartmentalizes.
Yep.
I was going to say that, the structure of this is that you've cast a soldier in a spy movie, and what happens when you have a straight ahead on a soldier who gets placed in a spy world. But what just occurred to me as you two were speaking was, this is also, you've cast someone from the quote unquote greatest generation and put them in what I would call the 70s, because the world of government conspiracy that is so much out of this world of 70s cinema. And so it's like you're taking, by the time the greatest generation get to the 70s, they're all middle-aged.
Yeah.
So they're just like looking at the people rebelling against the establishment as, why are you rebelling against the establishment we worked so hard to build?
Yeah.
Cap's 30. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
he's a young guy, but has the values that came out of the Depression and World War II, and is now being confronted in this world that is very gray and very dark. And that's the argument that they're having right now. And the question becomes, of course, can we trust Nick Fury? And he takes him out to the elevator, puts in a code, overrides the fact that Steve Rogers doesn't have clearance to go down into this elevator, and then he tells this story.
My granddad worked in a nice building, got good tips. He'd walk home every night, a roll of one stuffed in his lunch bag.
You ever get mugged?
Every week some punk would say, "What's in the bag?"
What would he do?
He'd show him. Bunch of crumpled ones and a loaded .22 Magnum.
So Samuel L. Jackson's grandfather really did run an elevator. This is his story about his grandfather.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm going to separate the two because I don't trust Nick Fury as far as I can throw him. So I don't even know if this story is true, even though it's a moving, poignant story. And is this Nick working Steve even more by appealing to this idea of a hardworking man who, you know, the life changes or the world changes around him, but he stays true to who he is and he protects himself, he defends himself. So is he playing Steve? Because remember earlier, which we skipped over, he says, like, you know, the last time I trusted a friend, I lost an eye, which we now can, as we watch the movie, connect that to Captain Marvel and the Flerken and all of this kind of stuff. So it's not as actually nefarious or as it doesn't have a hint of betrayal because that's not how it went down, that he trusted a friend and lost an eye. Yes, technically that's how it went down, but it wasn't like his friend turned on him and shot his eye out, which is what the insinuation seems to be. So I think Nick is the kind of guy who will use whatever story he wants to use in order to get people to be on his side. So, you know, when you go back and watch these movies and you really analyze Nick Fury, there is some real nefarious shit behind the scenes that he does, and you kind of go along with it because you accept that he's a good guy, but there are questions to be asked of Fury's behavior. And if anything he told anybody is the truth, you know?
I think it could 100% be true. It could 100% not be true.
Right.
But either way, of course he's manipulating Steve.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I mean, and when we get into this next scene, because what I love is we're coming down in the elevator, I love that we see sort of the reflections of something in the background because it's a glass elevator before we understand what it is. And then we come out and we see they are building these huge helicarriers that look somehow way more advanced than the helicarrier and the Avengers. And we've heard that, they've got repulsor technology from Stark. And then we hear
These new long-range precision guns can eliminate 1,000 hostiles a minute. The satellites can read a terrorist's DNA before he steps outside his spider hole. We're gonna neutralize a lot of threats before they even happen.
Is Nick Fury's plan to kill people before they get a chance to commit a crime?
That is what it sounds like.
Yeah. And I think when we find out that about Zola, when we get to that scene and he explains how they kind of burrowed their way into S.H.I.E.L.D., you can see how you can just remove a couple of things and you can steer people like S.H.I.E.L.D. like Nick Fury rather, in S.H.I.E.L.D. who are afraid of foreign threats attacking good old USA, being willing to, how can I say, work outside the lines in order to protect the country and rationalize it. And so the idea of being able to monitor everybody, you think you're doing it in a benevolent way because you want to protect the country from nefarious people, but in the way you're removing freedom. And this is why Steve is such an important part of this. The confrontation he has here, or earlier with Nick, that leads to them getting in the elevator, Steve is very clear about who Steve Rogers is. And Steve Rogers is very much, there is a right and there is a wrong. And he may be the good old Boy Scout, but he knows what's right. And we, at our best, want to believe in what Captain America sees for our country. But I think Nick Fury is actually who we are when we see these things. And it's a hard thing we reckon with in our lives when we look at some of the stuff and do any research. So when he goes down there and presents it to him, it's a little bit more than a Magnum when he shows the helicarriers, that's Steve really kind of taking that in. And Nick had been setting him up the whole time to show him this. And he thinks he's doing the right thing. But Steve, of course, is not happy with this kind of stuff because he represents the best of our principles, which is freedom and not being monitored constantly by a government agency.
I think what's so scary about this movie, the more you think about it, is that the difference between Pierce and Nick Fury and their plans is really one of degrees.
Yes.
It's not one of totally opposed philosophies. Right. It's just how many people are we going to kill and how quick, and how much evidence do we need to decide that we're going to kill that person? Yeah, I think it's extremely troubling. And I like, and Nick calls Steve out and says, hey, you got your Greatest Generation guys. You did some bad stuff.
Yeah, we compromised, sometimes in ways that made us not sleep so well. But we did it so that people could be free. This isn't freedom. This is fear.
But and I want to ask you guys, I know Steve asks the questions usually, but I ask you, is Steve deluding himself, right? Every generation deludes themselves about the nefarious shit they did. Because as we find out later in Captain America and Winter Soldier, they had a Winter Soldier plan where they used black men to suffer through the experiments until they found one that worked on Isaiah Bradley. So, this idea of, well, but we did it to keep our freedom. Now, when Steve starts to learn more about this stuff, I think this idea of like, oh, well, we did it, but we did break the rules, but like we did it, we had trouble sleeping, but we did it to, it's the same logic that Fury is using, it's the same logic that Pierce is using to a degree, is this idea of wanting to, or the desire to cross the lines at times or rationalize across the lines at times, because the desire is to keep people free or to keep the country free or keep the country safe. And so there's little things like that everyone has the ulterior motive of doing what they think is the best thing. But as you said, Steve, so well, it's about degrees and where you side and where you land when you look at these people.
I'm trying to think of a way to answer your question that won't take an hour. So
now we can skip past it.
Because I think this is a critical question. So, and here's the analogy I'll use, is Werner Herzog, the famous filmmaker, yes. odd person. He would teach a workshop on filmmaking. And the first thing he would tell his students is, you all need to learn how to pick locks and forge documents. Because he believed that all of the rules that are put in front of filmmakers should just be broken. And as a filmmaker who has made a lot of guerrilla films, and you guys, John, you acted in Siren, I have broken lots of rules. And I have gone, you know what? I just need a shot of the exterior of that building, and I can't spend the $1,000 it's going to take me in time and insurance to get a permit to shoot this. I'm just going to grab a camera and shoot it. Right. And I've broken the rules. And is that honest? And my feeling is that of course we're going to break some rules. Of course you got to push it. If you have if you know that someone's smuggling a nuclear bomb and you're 100% certain of it, should you justified in assassinating that person? It's like, my feeling is, if you're 100% certain of it, probably yes. The problem is, and the problem with S.H.I.E.L.D.'s plan, we're rarely 100% certain. Yeah. And we can't actually, whereas I know the consequences of me filming that building and not having a permit, they're basically zero consequences. Nothing bad's going to happen because of that action. These actions that S.H.I.E.L.D. is talking about, they're terrible consequences. Yeah. And we have heard over and over and over again about things our government has done that they go, oh, we have these plans with Cuba, we have these plans, and they don't work out well, And so I am extremely cautious when you get into people's lives about whether or not how you make these decisions. But yeah, sometimes you have to push the boundaries of the rules. I agree with that.
Yeah, and before Shannon and Cap, like how eager was Cap to explore the nefarious stuff America was doing while he was asleep, or during the war while he was frozen? Do you know what I'm saying? So Cap is operating from this idealistic point of view of where they were coming from, without probably, I sense, not having done the research to see, because obviously he doesn't know about the program until later on in the MCU's chronological timeline. So he didn't do that much research to try to find out if we had done nefarious shit back in the 40s and 50s. Shannon, what are your thoughts on that question?
Well, I mean, I think it's that fine line between idealism and naivete, because it's the Minority Report angle. Like, stopping something
right.
that was going to happen doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen. But the flaw in that is that you can't ever be 100% certain.
Right.
And I think, I imagine Steve Rogers would not be a fan of the preemptive attack.
Yeah.
That would be my guess. But also, when you're talking about things that have already happened, there's nothing you can do to change those. Like they have occurred. So I kind of agree with Steve Rogers' point of view in that, like, yep, we did some bad stuff and we couldn't sleep. this we can see. I have an idea of where this is going to go.
Yeah, I can stop this from happening. Right,
Yeah.
right.
Needless to say, they don't agree at the end of this confrontation. And Steve, by the way, Steve, who's all about obeying the rules, he doesn't obey the rules of wearing a helmet on his motorcycle. Just saying.
Well, I mean, he'll survive the crash.
Morris, did you get some gorilla shots?
I did. And by the way, if I were Steve Rogers, I wouldn't wear a helmet anyway. I mean, like, the guy's beautiful. Like, I mean, why hide that beautiful face? And we end up at the Smithsonian Institute at the Air and Space Museum, which, John, you mentioned how much you love DC. I love DC too. And going to the Smithsonian, this is all like just key things in my life. And they have a big crane. This is actually shot in the Smithsonian, inches away from the Spirit of St. Louis. Everyone on the set that day was very, very nervous that they would mess something up. And by the way, and then once we have that main shot of the Air and Space Museum, we're now in Cleveland, which most of the exteriors in this film are shot in Cleveland, which I didn't realize was where the Russos were from.
Yep.
I just read that they got a $9.5 million tax credit for filming in Cleveland. And that's why, and I think it all looks great. And we see this whole exhibit in this museum for Captain America and the Howling Commandos. And we're hearing, I think they do such a good job of, you can hear those sort of museum voices, like saying little pieces of the story as he walks through the exhibit. And I just think this is a perfect example of how to do fantastic exposition.
Captain America and his Howling Commandos quickly earn their stripes. Their mission, taking down Hydra, the Nazi rogue science division.
Which is that they need to make sure that not everyone has maybe saw the first Avenger. We want to make sure that everyone's caught up. We want to make sure it's like the previously on an episode thing. We want to show you the key piece of information, particularly Bucky, that you're going to need to know. But what's happening is that it's Steve Rogers walking through his own exhibit, and all the emotions that this causes for him makes this totally not feel like exposition.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, Steve, was that this is exposition executed perfectly, because the whole reason for this scene, the story purpose, is to remind the audience about Bucky, and it's to show the audience that uniform. Those are the only two things you have to check off that on your list. The rest of this is just gravy. And it's done so well. Cap having that moment with the little boy where the kid totally recognizes him, and he just gives him just a small smile and puts his finger up. This is one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Yeah, I think it serves two purposes, right? Because as you said, three maybe, because as you said, it reminds us of Bucky, but it also reinforces, as I said earlier, an unmoored Captain America, an unmoored Steve Rogers, right? He comes back. I imagine this isn't the first time he's come back to secretly walk through this.
Yeah.
Because it is, in essence, we all have our favorite film or a song or memory that kind of stabilizes us and grounds us back to who we are. And it helps us like kind of let go of stuff that's going on with ourselves. And so him coming back to this is important for him to reestablish himself. But I also think it's important after the meeting with Fury. Right? Because it's like him going to this, it reminds him of who he is. And although Fury may have like shaken him a little bit, he need to come back here to kind of remember and essentially recharge as Captain America. And I think it's important for him and for us as the audience to go through this, because it also builds sympathy for us with Steve again, as he's navigating all of this and the shame of Bucky, you know?
Yeah, he, along with recharging himself, he's going to visit his friends.
Yeah. Right, yeah, exactly. Right, that are not around. His barbershop quartet, as he said. Yeah.
Well, and again, for us, this is 80 years ago.
Yeah.
For Cap, this is 2 or 3 years ago. Like, this is really recent history that everyone else, and I love, by the way, it's shots like of the kids measuring themselves against small, tiny Steve and then big Steve Rogers. Like, I love all of those things. And I think when I saw this in the theater, this was totally out of nowhere. But you suddenly hear Peggy's voice.
That was a difficult winter. A blizzard had trapped half our battalion behind the German line. Steve, Captain Rogers, he fought his way through a Hydra blockade that had pinned our allies down for months.
And then there is Peggy giving her interview, as you do, about about this person, talking about Steve. And I love, again, beautiful tiny piece of writing. that as she's describing what happened, she says, Steve, Captain Rogers, because this is the man that she loves. And no, but that's not how she's supposed to talk about him under the circumstances. That little bit of writing is great.
He saved over 1,000 men, including the man who would become my husband, as it turned out. Even after he died, Steve was still changing my life.
Haley's such a guy.
She's so great,
actress, right? And we're about to see a really great scene with her. But like her moment, her saying that about her husband, she isn't saying it like with joy. Like she isn't like overwhelmingly happy and like this was her second choice. She was probably still in love with Steve the whole time she was with this man, and her saying that, and he ended up saving the guy who ended up becoming my husband. So it ended up basically taking Steve's place in my life, in a way. So you can tell there's a bittersweetness to that I think is important to note, because we're about to go into the scene with him and Peggy in the hospital.
I have lived a life. My only regret is that you didn't get to live yours.
This scene with her, with old Peggy, is so great. And first of all, Haley performed this with very little makeup. It's just like some little markers on her face. And then they had an older actress play it as well, exactly as she did. And this old makeup on her is all digital.
What?
Yeah.
I have to say I did not know that. And it was so good that I went back on IMDb and I was like, is there an older actress who plays Peggy? And there is no listing for older Peggy. It is just, so I was like, this is an incredible performance from Haley to do it without the age makeup. Because, actors, Shannon, once you put like the clothes on or the makeup on, it can really influence your performance. So the fact that she was doing this without prosthetics on or any kind of old age makeup on and hitting the speech pattern of an older lady and all of this, what an incredible performance from Peggy. There's so much in this scene between them. There's so much emotional weight, and that notebook moment at the end is even more devastating, for God's sake. So
the talent that Haley Atwell is, I mean, she's just so incredible, because I think plain old, believably plain old, it's really hard. I mean, and when you put on that makeup, you put on the wig, there is the element of dressing up for a school play, and you don't get the sense from that at all. So the fact that she is playing this older version of herself, and then layering in the dementia, layering in the Alzheimer's that it seems that she has, just absolutely heartbreaking.
I think the scene is so good. And first of all, just the shock of it. Like, I think you're kind of surprised to hear Peggy's voice at this exhibit. And then as you're hearing Peggy's voice, you're like, oh my God, is that Peggy? Like, are we with, and she's lived this whole life. And they have this incredibly sweet, tender scene where he, for the first time, expresses the thing that we've been talking about, which is, where does he fit in this world? He doesn't know where he fits. He says,
for as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right. I guess I'm not quite sure what that is anymore. And I thought I could throw myself back in and follow orders, serve. It's just not the same.
So he has now done what, in general, I would say you don't want your characters to do, which is to fully express truthfully exactly how they're feeling at a particular moment. And in general, in screenwriting, you don't want to do that because you don't want to release your tension. But here he's with someone who just so completely understands him and so loves him. And it's like this incredibly safe space. And she says,
"You're always so dramatic. Look, you saved the world. We rather mucked it up."
You didn't. Knowing that you helped found S.H.I.E.L.D. is half the reason I stay.
And right there, just that connection between the two, that he could feel her presence walking through the hallways of S.H.I.E.L.D. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Is right. And it's so great. And she's giving him some good advice.
The world has changed. None of us can go back. All we can do is our best. And sometimes the best that we can do is to start over.
And then she coughs, and you don't really think anything of it. And he goes to get her a glass of water, as you do. And then she looks up, and again, her performance is so incredible because she sees him for the very first time.
Like all over again.
Steve.
Yeah.
You're alive. You came back.
And I think as an audience member, it takes you a second to understand what's happened.
Which is the whole point.
And I burst into tears. Like the realization that this might have happened a dozen times, that she has seen him for the first time a dozen times, and he has seen her see him for the first time a dozen times.
Yeah.
And has these moments of truth and connection, and then it's going to go away again.
Right.
Terrible.
She says it's been so long, right? And that's kind of, but again, here is Steve going to the two places where he knows who he is, right? The remembrance of the war, Bucky, the Howling Commandos. This is what we fought for in the 1940s, the greatest generation and all that. And then Peggy, who is the extension of that in person, right? Because none of the commandos are alive. It's just Peggy who's left. I'm sure Tommy Lee Jones died a while ago, that character. So he is, so she is the last connection to that and having the conversation. But I think it's important too that the conversation isn't just a sweet connection. It's got an undercurrent that is fraught here as we look at the overall MCU. Cap says the fact that you founded the Shield is half of the reason that I'm there. But we do know that Peggy did some questionable stuff. And her saying we mucked it all up is a way of referencing that. And Cap is, in essence, this is also reestablishing that Cap is like, we all go through this, where we transition from teenager into our 20s or 30s, where the idealism of our lives is shattered by the reality of nefarious shit that our government or institutions or our family members or our friends or their parents have done in the community or the state or the country or the world, right? We all have to grow up. And in essence, Steve Rogers needs to grow up. And Peggy, in a way, is reaffirming that. Her saying, you have to reinvent yourself. She's basically saying, like, you've got to put that old shit away. You've got to stop holding on to these principles. You're being so dramatic. She's lived through the world. She's seen the world, how gray it can be from the beginnings of Captain America First Avenger to where she is now. So she's essentially trying to tell Steve in her own way, like, you can't be this Boy Scout anymore, man. It's a harder world than you think. And as beautiful as the scene is, I also think it's reaffirming this overall narrative of Steve's journey in this film.
The scene is so good. And it just so perfectly encapsulates how everything has been taken away from Steve. And the thing that I love too is that even in the moment of everything being taken away, the moment at which she's forgotten him again, Steve Rogers is still a good guy.
It's been so long. So long.
Well, I couldn't leave my best girl. Now when she owes me a dance.
Ugh. Which I guess he probably said that line over and over. He said it over and over again. And having dealt with someone with dementia, like, this is what you do, because you're not going to remind them. Don't you? We were just talking about this thing a minute. Like, no, you give them what they need at that moment.
Right. Because that adds to the anxiety if you remind them.
Yeah. Nick's in his office at S.H.I.E.L.D. There's some security issue where he can't get access to something, which I don't even quite understand why Pierce at this moment has cut off Nick Fury's security or what happened, because it doesn't seem like a very good plan because it leads to everything else bad that's about to happen. But Nick goes up in the elevator to go talk to someone, and we hear this meeting going on that's about Nick Fury and about these costume thugs. And then we're in this meeting room, and there we see Robert Redford. John, how do you feel about this casting?
It's great. I mean, I was so happy. And when he turned out to be evil, I was even happier because Redford, like, you could count on your two fingers the times he's played villains in a movie. And this is like it's like Henry Fonda playing a villain Once Upon a Time in the West. It was like so out of the realm of your idea of this guy. And he plays it so well. And just like we talked about earlier, the idea of whose worldview is correct is a matter of degrees. He just adjusts his good guy thing just a little bit to the right or left to make it a slightly evil. and it works, and I thought he did a wonderful job. And if you're going to do a political thriller, having Robert Redford in it is a great way to establish it when you think of 3 Days of the Condor. So I thought it was so excellent. And the way he handles this meeting, by the way, with the great Genia Gutter there, who some of you may remember from Logan's Run and American Werewolf in London, that's her. And the dude from, was it Ugly Betty, and the guy who was, in Batman: The Dark Knights, who is the talkative, who is the one that Joker says, "I know the squealers when I see them." So this collection of actors that I think is a great to establish this overseer type of situation. In his Powers booth, wasn't he in the earlier one, and now he's not in this one? How does that work, or was he later? When is Powers booth?
No, he showed up in the Avengers, and then he showed up on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I don't well, yeah, I mean, I guess it would have been the same organization. It's the World Security Council.
Right. I wonder if he died at that point as in real life, which is why maybe he didn't come back. But it would have been nice to have Powers in this as well. But the way Robert handles this meeting is fucking great, man.
So, by the way, John, you are exactly on the money, because the Russo brothers said what their example was. We wanted to do something like Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West. Wow. So you're 100% correct on that. The thing, we've said this about Redford before when we've done movies with him. Like, you can always see him thinking.
Yeah.
Like, there's always something going on with him, even when he's doing very little. And he's so ahead of everybody. And the smugness of Redford in this meeting, I just love. And by the way, the reason that he decided to do this was his grandkids love Marvel movies. And he was just like, well, I'll do something that they'll get to see.
I work 40 floors away, and it takes a hijacking for you to visit.
A nuclear war would do it too.
And they shake hands, and we get a sense, oh, these guys are friends. Yeah. And Nick says, I want you to stall the Insight project, which is a big deal. And he thinks and says,
fine. But you got to get Iron Man to stop by my niece's birthday party.
Thank you, sir.
And not just a flyby. He's got to mingle.
So we're like, oh, okay, Robert Redford's a good guy. Do you ever think that Robert Redford's a good guy in this movie?
Well, he gave it away in the promotions leading up to the film that he was playing a bad guy.
Oh, Robert.
Yeah. The first of many actor leaks that probably give Kevin Feige headaches. But yeah, he did admit in an interview that yes, he was playing the antagonist, even
That's
though
the problem when you cast older actors who've been in important movies and they go and be in a Marvel movie. They're like, it's not that big of a deal, and it's like, no, it is to a lot of people. Don't say shit. But yeah, he did. He kind of revealed it accidentally. But no, I mean, I think this. First of all, calling it Insight is very on the nose, but. Yeah, insights, but like the idea of them having the back and forth. What's great about the performances here when you're watching these actors, Samuel L. is appropriately, how can I say this? Submissive in a way that he's not submissive in any other interaction, right? You can tell by his body language. He's like looking down. He's kind of the right shoulders up a little bit. It's his way of like surrendering power to Pierce. Because as we find out later, it was Pierce who's always kind of been above him, and it was Pierce who promoted him, as when he's having the interaction with Steve in a few scenes from now. So Samuel plays it in a different way. We haven't seen this color on Fury before, and I think it's nice. And as you said, Steve, it establishes them as friends because they clearly have a history, and he would only give this kind of vulnerability to someone he really trusted, and that's Pierce, which ironically turns out to be the wrong thing.
Well, he does something that in my memory, he has not done yet in the MCU. He asks for a favor.
Yeah.
Even in the Avengers, when he's talking to Thor says, what are you asking me to do? He's like, I'm asking what you're prepared to do. He's not actually asking him. He's manipulating the situation. Here, this is a request. This is a question.
Yeah, there are no Coulson cards full of blood to throw on the table to convince Robert Redford. Right?
And from this moment, we hear in pre-lap this woman telling this story about a cop pulling her over, and we're not entirely sure what it is. And then we find ourselves at a meeting of veterans at the VA being run by Sam, and she's talking about basically PTSD and this experience of thinking that a plastic bag was an IED.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because that woman is the sister of the Russo brothers. She runs their production company. She is one of the head now, by this point. She is one of the head of the entertainment wing of their production company. So trained, studied as an actress, all of that. But like once the Russos started going, it became a family business. So the three of them are a part of this company. So yeah, so I thought she did a really nice job with. And she's done occasional roles and in the Marvel universe and outside the Marvel universe. She also, I think, co-wrote Cherry, the one with Tom Holland. Yeah, so she's certainly talented. And I thought she delivers a nice job with this, because the military stuff is, you got to make it feel like it's something that is believable. And I thought she did a nice job. So I think it's an essential way to kind of walk us into this scene and give us the mood of this scene. So I thought that was cool.
I mean, if you want to get into showbiz, you want to be a Russo, because I don't know if it's Joe or Anthony Russo, but it's two of their kids. One of them is Hawkeye's daughter, who pops up in Age of Ultron first.
Wow.
And then, or maybe she takes over the role because she's in Endgame. She's also in the Hawkeye series. And there's another one of their kids who is one of the kids in Endgame where they find Smart Hulk at the diner.
Oh yeah.
When they take the selfie. That's another Russo kid. So man, we were born with a wrong last name, Johnny.
I know.
Yeah, man. Our parents, they didn't do anything for getting us in the entertainment industry. God. Stupid optometrist. How does that help me?
Right.
To your point, John, this is the kind of scene that, I don't know if you have this experience, Shannon, but it drives a writer crazy, because it's like, I have to handle a really serious thing. I have to do it in about 25 seconds. And I have to do it right. Otherwise, people can easily be offended. And I think in particular, you can see that Sam is really good at running these meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Steve can see that Sam is really good at running these meetings.
This is what makes Sam Wilson in the MCU such a captivating character, because you see that, yes, he is a soldier. Yes, he is highly trained. He knows how to do a lot of stuff. But his strongest skill is his ability to communicate.
Some stuff you leave there, other stuff you bring back. It's our job to figure out how to carry it. Is it going to be in a big suitcase or in a little man purse? It's up to you.
It's after the meeting, and Steve comes up to Sam and says,
Caught the last few minutes. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, brother. We all got the same problems.
and here's what I love about that line. Is that Sam doesn't see Steve as a superhero. He doesn't see him as an Avenger. He doesn't see him as a celebrity. He sees him as a fellow veteran, and that's it.
Yeah. A soldier. Fellow soldier. Absolutely, 100%.
And the thing that occurred to me, and it goes back to why that opening scene is so great, is that you would think that the high status person in this relationship is obviously Captain America. He's Captain America. He's the highest status person everywhere he goes. And yet he's come to Sam for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so they never have that, oh, this is the hero and his sidekick. That energy never exists at all. And it's partially because of the way you established them in that opening scene and now here.
Yeah.
The history of Steve Rogers as well, which we see later on, right? When we see that memory of him and Bucky after he buries his mom. This is a kid who lost the parental unit at a relatively young age. And so this idea of needing to reach out or needing to connect or needing help, it's not something he does easily, but he knows instinctually that he should, which is why he's here. He doesn't even I don't think he would consciously be able to admit why he's there, but he felt drawn to show up there and go there. And it's because he needs help for dealing with how unmoored he is from what's going on in his world and how out of sorts he feels, right? This is a place I can find some kind of solace. Because who was there for him before, as we find out later in the movie? Bucky. Bucky's not there. He needs another best friend. And that's where Sam is kind of slowly, not purposely, but slowly kind of sliding into that role.
And Steve, at this point, he doesn't have a whole lot of places to go.
Yeah, right.
He hasn't really connected with anyone. Like, he can go see Peggy. He can go to the Smithsonian and see old newsreel footage of his buddies, but he doesn't really have anyone to turn to. And Sam opening that door in that first scene, saying, anytime you want to come by the VA and help me impress this girl who we do not meet in this scene, that would be great.
Yeah.
And then we hear a little bit about Sam's story, that he's lost someone, that he lost his wingman, and he tells the story of what happened. And you can I think Anthony Mackie plays this just right. Totally straightforward, doesn't put a lot on it, but you can feel it, Nothing
we hadn't done 1,000 times before. Till RPG knocked Riley's dumbass out of the sky. Nothing I could do. It's like I was up there just to watch. Sorry. After that, I had a really hard time finding a reason for being over there, you know?
And Steve asks him if he's happy now. And this leads to, and it's so crazy to think about, oh, he's asking a fellow veteran if he's thinking about getting out of the service.
Yeah.
But what he's also asking is, does Captain America want to stop being Captain America, you know?
Mm-hmm.
What you thinking about getting out?
No. I don't know. To be honest, I don't know what I would do with myself if I did.
I mean, you know, it's not easy for Steve Rogers to express that pain that he's got, I think.
Yeah, and the genius in the writing, which I think, you know, Marcus McFeely, as you said earlier, Steve, really nailed this, is that he is speaking as he is speaking for his own personal experience, but he's also speaking in a universal way for a lot of vets. And we've seen that in The Hurt Locker, we've seen it in other films, and of course in documentaries, how so many of them, after a theater of war experience, don't quite know how to integrate back into society, don't know where they belong, don't know where they fit, because on the battlefield, they had all kinds of responsibilities and they were in charge of stuff, and life and death constantly was there. And then back home, it's so different. And it's not something that some people can transition into comfortably. And certainly Steve seems a bit lost. And naturally, Sam's instinct is he senses that, which is why he goes right to that conversation to kind of have the gentle opening of that conversation with him to see if he can get him to speak about it a little bit. Yeah.
And I love the end of the scene, which is...
Seriously, you could do whatever you want to do. What makes you happy?
I don't know.
Cut to Nick Fury in a car. He just has a conversation with Agent Hill. And then after the conversation with Agent Hill, we have this moment where a cop is pulled up. And I think we as an audience are thinking like, oh, he's about to get harassed because he's an African-American driving a nice car. And that's where we think this moment is going to go. That's not where this is going to go. This is going to go into an absolutely ridiculous action sequence, and which I think all really started with Samuel L. Jackson saying, how come Nick Fury doesn't get to do any cool stuff?
This is practical filmmaking in Marvel at its highest level. This is such a great car chase. Every hit that you see, I remember watching it in the theater and you just feel it.
I love this chase scene because it's brutal where it needs to be brutal. It's scary when it needs to be scary. And then it's inventive when it needs to be inventive with Fury's logic. When he's telling that thing when he's telling the system not to release any countermeasures until the final moment, so that he can get the jump on them. So there's a lot of these. The construction of the sequence is really fun to watch as it escalates to a final there where he escapes through the asphalt in the ground.
So that first cop hits the siren, and we first go like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And then out of nowhere, he is slammed by multiple cars at the same time. You know, he's surrounded. Police are coming in. They open fire on him. He's obviously in a super high-tech vehicle, and he asks for the system to save him.
Get me out of here.
And of course, everything he's asking the system to do is not actually going to work.
Propulsion systems offline. Then reboot, damn it!
See, fortunately, this car is bulletproof, but we also see this is not going to last very long, particularly when they bring up this ridiculous battering ram.
Yeah.
Yes, the battering ram that drills into the ground to make itself stronger. Yeah.
Warning, window integrity compromised.
Which, by the way, I totally think comes from Die Hard, because there's the moment when they bring the rocket launcher down and they drill it into the ground. And I remember, John, when we did Die Hard, that John McTiernan said, oh, that's just something that they made up. You know, it's not really a real thing. And now we have a super cool version of it here. Yeah. And it's just this moment that you say, that battering ram is hitting the window and the car wants to deploy the countermeasures, and he stalls it until the last possible second when the engine is coming online. He opens fire, and first the car is driving itself, then he takes over. It's a super ridiculously exciting car chase, and then we hit a traffic jam.
Yeah.
Here is how the idea for this part of the action sequence came about: is somebody found some actual footage from a car chase in Brazil, where a guy is fleeing in his car, runs into a traffic jam. All the cops get out of the cars to chase him on foot, and he is crashing through, trying to get through the traffic jam. And then it's just like in this, where the cops then have to jump back in the car as we get out of the traffic jam, and it continues. So it all came from a real car chase in Brazil, and that is the inspiration for what happens here.
I was afraid you were going to say when they were dragging a vault behind them, and you were going to it's Fast Five. So thank God it wasn't.
Along with being incredibly exciting, it also has those moments that are really, really funny.
Get me Agent Hill. Communications array damaged.
Well, what's not damaged?
Air conditioning is fully operational.
In earlier drafts, Marcus and McFeely had the car, because they say flight capabilities are offline. They had the car flying.
Oh,
At one point, the chase was going to go into the air, and I think what they did here was smart, because apparently Feige was like, "We need to keep this as real as possible."
Right,
and he's like, "Cars don't fly in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, at least at this point." But also, I think the moment that car takes off, the chase doesn't feel, you're not quite as invested. I think every hit of that battering ram, every bullet that gets fired at Samuel L., you are with him the whole time because it feels so real.
And it's pretty brutal. I mean, there's some times where he rams some, bad guys, but, with his car, and it looks like, man, you cut that guy in half. I mean, it is a really brutal scene. And I think Samuel L. Jackson was right to demand that he get this kind of sequence, because he is really good at doing the thing. I mean, the guy's just sitting in a chair in a studio for a good hunks of it, or just on the street not moving, and has to react to all the things that are going on around him, or act like he's driving, and he's doing a fantastic job.
He's great at action. He just doesn't like to run. Like, that's in his contract. That he was angry at Joss Whedon on the Avengers, because at one point it says Fury runs out onto the deck of the helicarrier, and he's like, "Motherfucker, what did I say?" He's like, "It's one scene. It's one scene."
And we think, oh, maybe he is going to get away. And then kind of through, because all the windshields are broken. So through these broken windshields, you sort of see a lone man out in front, out of focus.
Great visual. Firing a magnetic mine. That, again, just something that just looks it's just very visually dynamic. Watching it slide under the truck, immediately attach, and bang.
And then there's an explosion, and the car flip, and the Winter Soldier stepping out of the way of that car flipping and going by is phenomenal.
And the Winter Soldier in the comics, like he does have the long hair, but he has the domino mask, which a lot of comic characters wear, and doesn't translate the greatest to certain live action films. And in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I mean, with the exception of Ms. Marvel, I believe that there are no domino masks. Like you have helmets, you have different sorts of apparatuses to put on your head. But I think making the switch from the domino mask to this full face mask where the eyes are kind of blacked out, I think that was the coolest choice.
Nick is hurt in the bottom of the car, and he sees this dark figure coming. He grabs some kind of sparky thing. The Winter Soldier rips the door off, and somehow Nick has burnt his way through the roof of the car, through the pavement, and has disappeared. Now, I don't quite understand why the Winter Soldier just doesn't jump down that hole, because Nick can't be that far away, but he doesn't, and that's the end of the sequence.
Yeah.
Cap arrives back at his apartment, runs up the stairs. There's a woman doing laundry that he says hello to.
Hey, if you want, you're welcome to use my machine. Might be cheaper than the one in the basement.
I already have a load in downstairs, and you really don't want my scrubs in your machine. I just finished a rotation in the infectious disease ward, so...
Well, I'll keep my distance.
Hopefully not too far.
And this, of course, is Sharon Carter, Agent Sharon Carter, played by Elia Van Camp.
Emily.
Man, the list of people considered for this role, we got Emilia Clarke, Alison Brie, Elizabeth Olsen, Anna Kendrick, and Cara Gillan.
So Emily Van Camp ends up playing it, but Elizabeth Olsen was in contention, who then becomes Scarlet Witch. I think Elizabeth Olsen won that battle, clearly with the bigger parts.
Karen Gillan won that battle too.
Yeah, fair
who
point.
went on to play Nebula.
Yeah. I mean, that is a list of all fantastic people.
And people forget, like, this was the time when Emily Van Camp was like a big deal because of that show Revenge on ABC. So she was a nice to move her into the MCU. And of course she popped up in Falcon and Winter Soldier. So we'll see what her future is. But this is a controversial character for a lot of the fans of the MCU. I remember that.
Well, what happens with her in Falcon and the Winter Soldier it made no sense to me whatsoever.
Oh yeah. You could argue
terrible.
that for sure. But I mean, a lot of people were upset that they brought in someone who was a relative of Peggy Carter to try to replace Peggy Carter. As I know the fans were super upset about that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, from the comics, I can't remember if Sharon is her niece or Sharon, like they are related in the comics.
Yes.
And Sharon in the comics at least is a much bigger role.
Yes.
Than Peggy. I mean, Sharon is the one who sticks around. So the fact that Haley Atwell again is so beloved, but for whatever reason, like they decided to go more into the direction with Peggy rather than Sharon.
And they have a nice little flirty moment, and you're like, oh, cool. He has this attractive neighbor who obviously he might be a little interested in because he offers the use of the washing machine, and she's clearly interested. And like, oh, this seems really nice. And then she mentions that he's left the music on in his apartment. And as soon as we hear that, we're all going, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
And then we cut to a window being open because rather than going in through the front door, Steve has climbed up the fire escape and is climbing into his apartment. And the camera work, by the way, I think is beautiful in the way they set this up. And there we see a wounded Nick Fury waiting for him in the dark.
I don't remember giving you a key. You really think I'd need one?
And they do the perfect, I am doing dialogue, saying things because I know the room is mic'd while flashing you signs from my phone of what's going on. And what he flashes him on the phone is ears everywhere, shield compromised. What he says out loud is that he had a fight with his wife and has no place to crash. And I like Steve's response because Steve responds essentially in code. He says, when he sees the word shield compromised, he says,
who else knows about your wife?
Just my friends.
Is that what we are?
That's up to you.
It's a great setup because we have this, what's our first scene with Nick and Steve? A big fight about trust and about how Steve doesn't believe in S.H.I.E.L.D.'s mission. Now he finds out S.H.I.E.L.D.'s compromised and Nick's is depending on him. That's a great position to put him in.
Yeah.
And just as Steve is trying to reckon with whether or not he can trust this guy and what's going on, Nick stands up, and the moment he stands up, a shot rings out and he goes down. And right after that happens, the door opens and that nice girl that lives across the way that's like a nurse or something that he was flirting with has a gun because, of course, she is actually an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.
I'm Agent 13 of S.H.I.E.L.D. Special Service.
Kate?
I'm assigned to protect you.
On whose order?
His.
It's like betrayal after betrayal.
Well, the way that she refers to him as Captain Rogers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she calls in for help with Nick. And then Steve goes after what we know is the Winter Soldier. And he jumps through the window, across to the building, across the way. And he runs. I love, again, just Steve running through this building. It's not Hulk-like. You know what I mean? It is Captain America-like. Nothing is going to stop him as well.
Yeah, using that shield, he has become a battering ram. Like you see him knocking down sets of doors, but you also see he is emotionally charged at this moment because he's not running in a straight line. He trips a little bit. You see him hit a wall and create a big big dent in the wall. So you see like he is a battering ram and he is like laser focused, but at the same time he's not running perfect. Like he's ping ponging down the hallway a little bit.
And what I think we expect is we're going to have another big action sequence, a big chase scene, a big fight scene. That's what's going to happen. And what we get instead is, I think, one of the most incredible reveals of a character. Even though we kind of met him before in the scene with Nick Fury, we didn't really meet him. And now Steve Rogers crashes through this building, rolls across the roof, tosses his shield. And we know what happens when you toss that shield. You knock people down. And that's not what happens. Winter Soldier turns around and catches that shield. How do you feel about this moment?
Sebastian Stan, who doesn't have a ton of dialogue in this movie, Sebastian Stan does a fantastic job. He does a lot of eye acting. Later in the movie, he doesn't have the mask, but he's all acting with the eyes. But when his entire face is covered, with the exception of those like piercing eyes that he has, fantastic job. Like the moment I remember watching the trailer and seeing Sebastian Stan snag that shield, and you could hear the audible amongst the crowd about what an awesome moment this is going to be.
Yeah. And it's not enough that somebody else caught Steve Rogers' shield, but he throws it back and it drives Cap back like, 10 feet. He runs forward, looks off the building, and of course, the Winter Soldier is gone.
Yeah, it's almost, he doesn't even need to say it, but it's almost like that Batman moment. And what later happens with the Black Widow when they say, oh, that's what that feels like. It's for the first time, I think he feels what it's like to be hit by his own shield,
And now we're at surgery. Natasha has shown up. Agent Hill is there. And we're talking about the shooter. And Steve is describing him. We talk about the metal arm, the ballistics on the rifle. And as this is happening, Nick is flatlining. And they're having to get out the paddles. And I think they do an incredible job of focusing on Natasha in this scene. And just with those reaction shots, you get, oh, there's a special relationship here. Like there is a connection, maybe not a father figure, but something really important between Natasha and Nick Fury.
Yeah, in retrospect, looking back on this, you can say that the MCU, this was like a dry run for his relationship with Captain Marvel, with Brie Larson. The beats that him and Natasha share throughout this movie, especially, you can tell that like it was Nick who brought her over. It was Nick who had got her to change sides. It was Nick who like maybe smoothed things over so that a former Soviet agent could be part of the intelligence apparatus for the United States. And so you can tell that there is a deep connection here, just like with Captain Marvel later on. When we get to that section of the MCU. So this is Nick has a history of this kind of stuff, shall we say. And so certainly creates a mentor-mentee type of thing with some of these characters in the MCU.
Well, and I feel like that's something that the MCU has done really well, and I don't feel like it's actually talked about that much, is the platonic relationships that they have between men and women.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I don't feel like it's just Natasha. It's not just Captain Marvel. It's also Maria Hill. I mean, she really becomes Nick's number two through a lot of it. And then you look at the relationship that Clint and Natasha have. You look at the relationship that Steve and Natasha have. You look at and granted, they didn't really flesh this out, but the potential relationship that Carol Danvers and Thor would have had. There's just, they do a really, really good job. Because I feel like, action movies, there's always what's the love story? What's the love? Right. Who's the love interest? And in some of these, you don't actually need that. You just need relationships between people.
It's after, and we're just in the room with the body of Nick Fury, and Steve is in the background, Maria Hill is there, and Natasha is closest to them. And the orderlies come and say that they need to take the body away, and Natasha puts her hand on Nick Fury's head. And I think it's just a beautiful moment. And I will say, look, we know Nick Fury's not dead. I mean, obviously, we know now Nick Fury's not dead. But my guess is most of us sitting in the theater probably went, man, Nick Fury can't be dead.
Right.
I think this is one of the most convincing fake deaths, certainly in the MCU and superhero movies, but in movies in general. It is really sad, this moment.
Yeah. Definitely agreed. Because even in the theater, comic books are soap operas. I mean, no one in a soap opera is ever truly dead. Characters come back all the time in comics, but the way that it was shot and the way that we actually saw him die on the table, a lot of times when a character dies who comes back, you see it. It's Raiders. You see someone in a basket, Marion in a basket in a truck. The truck blows up. Marion's dead. Well, you didn't see her die, which is why when she shows up later, it's like, oh, yeah, of course they switched the basket. You see Nick Fury flatline. And so even though most of us, again, who grew up reading comics know that he's probably not gone, there is that moment that was really, really effective to the audience.
Yeah, especially because of the way they pitched the movie, right? With all the ads and all the conversations and the previews for it, it was like, this is their political thriller. This is their attempt to be taken more seriously as a film, right? As a franchise. to be taken more seriously. So killing off someone like Nick Fury would have been a huge decision to make it clear to everybody how what new angle and new approach they're having to the MCU going forward. So I think people probably thought, as you said, Steve, in the back of their minds, no way he's gone. But also, like, if he is, that's pretty incredible, you know.
So we have Steve Rogers, who really doesn't know his place in the world at this point. He's just had a large fight with Nick Fury, the person who brought him, one of the people who brought him back. He doesn't trust him. Then S.H.I.E.L.D. has fallen. One of these connections, Nick Fury is dead. He like, you could not be more lost. And I think this is a good point with a very lost Steve Rogers to end part one of our exploration of Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm sure you have them. A great place to share them would be on our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. If you're not into Facebook, you can go to Cine_Files on Twitter, the Cine-Files podcast on Instagram. If you want to support the show, there are two ways you could do it now. One, of course, is at patreon.com/the Cine-Files, where we have all of our tiers, including ad-free versions of the show, Cine-Files Shorts, the advisory board, Cine-Files watch-alongs, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But you can also support the show through Apple Podcasts by just subscribing right there, and that gives you ad-free versions of the show as well as access to our Cine-Files Shorts. If you're an Apple person, it's literally a one-button click. It's super easy, and you can buy or stream Captain America along with every other movie we've ever reviewed on cinephiles.net, and you can reach me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. Shannon McClung, how would people reach you?
Well, Steve Morris, if they would like to follow me on Twitter, it's at Shannon_McClung. On Instagram, at Shannon the Geek Buddy. And you can also see or hear me twice a week right now with Mr. Roca and Mr. Vogel on the Geek Buddies. We have our main show that typically drops on Fridays, and we're also reviewing X-Men 97 from Disney Plus. That typically drops on Wednesday or Thursday. Depends on when we can get our schedules figured out.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And John Stephen Roca, how would people find you on the internet?
You can find me at wintersoldier.com. At The Roca Says on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch, and my other podcasts, the Cine-Files, the Geek Buddies and the Hot Mic, and then my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Roca Says, trying to get to 50,000 subscribers here by the end of the year.
50,000. We need to get there by not the end of this month, next month. That's my goal for you.
Come aboard.
Let's do it. Come on, people. Yeah. And I think that's it for this week. We will be back next time to continue our exploration of the Winter Soldier right here on the Cine-Files.